how to say it. I think there might be like a bit of a communication barrier in some cases with my videos because I like to be very straight to the point, right? So I will
Mhm.
talk about things, but I think the way that, like, for example, a lot of the Wayland approaches are better. I think that some of the things that Plasma 6 is doing, they're good, but there's some very rough edges. And I won't like navigate around that. A lot of the time I'm just like, or like tiling window managers, for example. I think tiling is just a better approach to handling windows. And because of that, I get some comments from people being like, "Oh, why are you trying to like force this onto me?" Like, I'm not trying
Hmm.
to force anything onto you. I I've made it very
Right.
clear when I talk about like Wayland is the future of the Linux desktop. Like that's a fact.
Right.
That doesn't mean you
Right.
have to use it. Like you can go and use
Right.
anything you want, assuming that someone packages it, and that's the other thing that I bring up every so often. And people don't like to hear that. I'm like, yeah, but Red Hat is pulling out of Xorg completely, and they're basically one of the main
Yep.
maintainers of it. So you've got to maintain it yourself, pretty much, if you want to keep using it. And when I say that, people are like, "Oh, well, why are you trying to take this away? Why?" Like, no one.
Nope. And
I
and that really
yeah,
drives me crazy too. I think Gnome gets the most of that because people will make comments again. And don't get me wrong, if somebody says, I dislike Gnome, I tried it, it's just not for me. I have
sure.
nothing to say to that. Whatever. I've tried many things that didn't work out for me. But if somebody then gives a reason that's not true, then it's like, well, hold on. Like they'll say, well, it's bloated. No. Yes, it is. It's using a gig of RAM. Unused RAM is wasted RAM.
Hmm.
Good. It's caching RAM. Congratulations. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It doesn't mean it's heavy, but people get this opinion that it is, even when it's truly not. And you measure it, and I could line GNOME up with Mate, roughly the same amount of memory if you want to really get technical. But they believe it's true, and then there's all this culture of don't use this because I don't like it. I don't
Right.
like GNOME, you shouldn't use GNOME. I don't like Plasma, so you shouldn't use it. But that goes against the very reason why these exist in the first place,
Hmm.
because we could use something if we don't like the other thing. And that's kind of the point. If you're on Windows, you can't say, I hate the interface. I'm just going to delete it and put a different one on it and then use Windows with a different UI. And sure, Windows users are probably saying, well, I've done that yesterday. Yeah, theming the Windows desktop is one thing, but actually putting a different desktop environment on top of it, that's what we get to do.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that is amazing because we don't all have to like the same thing.
Hmm.
And I think that's when the community starts to miss the point and why I try to double down on everyone has his or her own preference, and that's okay.
Hmm.
That's why we have these things.
Uh, well, one of the things that you did mention in there was that how I'm really struggling with words today.
Yeah, me too. It's like freezing down here, and I've got to turn the space heater on.
Uh,
So um,
well, it's 8 o'clock.
it's
It's
a
8 a.m.
basement
here, and this is
studio.
where when I normally be waking up. Uh,
Ah,
so one of the things you mentioned in there was people having thoughts on something based on things that are not true. And
right.
I don't think it's always that they're not true. I think it's that the information they have is outdated. That I think is a lot
Yeah,
more often, where you have something
yeah,
like GNOME likes to remove features. Yes, they did. Like back
right,
during the end of GNOME 3, they were
right.
completely removing major modules because they were rewriting things. They were removing features back then, and then they've been slowly adding them back in with like a properly maintained module that they can actually like develop and improve upon. So that was true at a point. Or
Right.
people's perception of Plasma. Like I've said Plasma is kind of rough around the edges, but there are some people that their last time using Plasma was KDE 4. And like, yeah, you're gonna
Ah.
have a very different opinion of Plasma, especially if you use 4.0. Like,
Oh gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I stuck through from 4.0 to 4.12 and used everything in between, if I remember correctly.
mhm, mhm.
So that was my last. I was a Plasma user full time up until I think right before 5 came out. I just almost made it to the end of 4 and it didn't
Mhm.
quite make it all the way. But when you say so we have things that people say that aren't true. Yeah, I do see your point, like outdated information. But they'll sometimes people say, well, GNOME is removing features because they're trying to push, this onto other
Sure, sure.
people when literally say we took out this feature because we just don't have enough people to take care of our code base, and this one isn't getting any attention at all.
Mhm.
So, it's probably a security risk as well. But if someone wants to, like, help out, they might be more inclined to keep it around. But sometimes it's just important to understand that developers don't have a team meeting with the community and say, we need to make everybody angry. So how is the best way that we can make everybody angry with our next update? Because that's what we want to do. Like, nobody has that conversation.
Mhm.
It's kind of like this, I guess, you can't please everyone kind of thing. Because if you go this direction, then these people that don't like that direction, they won't go that direction. But then again, we have other desktop environments. So at the end of the day, I feel like it's always okay in our community.
I think a lot of people have this misconception of the way that like a lot of these big projects are run, because you can look at a small terminal and you're like, oh, there's like 5 contributors on the terminal. Like, okay, that makes sense. And you look at
Mhm.
something big like GNOME, and you're like, how many hundreds of people are working on it? I don't know what the number is. If somebody happens to know how many contributors there are, let me know in the comments.
Ton.
Um,
Yeah, a lot.
yeah, it's probably over like a couple thousand. Like over the lifespan of GNOME. How many of them are active? I don't know. Um, but people see how many people work on it, how much money like the GNOME Foundation has, like the fact that the GNOME Foundation actually has like employees, and I think they assume that if there's that many people working on GNOME, every part of it is being treated the same way. Whereas there are things like the GNOME
Yeah.
calendar, where that's basically maintained by one guy.